Hey, hi, hello everyone, and welcome to a video about combat. But not really about the combat itself, more about the map and what you use to play your combat. Um, Most of you will probably want to play combat on a map like the one behind me, but that's not what we're really going to talk about today, because what's behind me is really expensive stuff. Um, and the only thing you'll really get out of a map like the one behind me is extra immersion, a way lighter pocket, and maybe some players who find it really cool. And maybe the last thing is that you'll be able to do 3D movement a bit better, but it's still quite fake. So you don't get quite a lot out of this. It just looks visually impressive. And so that's why most people will want to use a map like this. This is kind of a standard map. Everyone who has played D&D will probably recognize this. This is a map that is used on VTTs. VTTs stand for virtual tabletops, for those who don't know, and are basically online websites or programs that allow you to play on a virtual table. And then you have 2D maps on those, like the one behind me, and you use tokens to move on top of them and to move around. Usually, each player can drag their character around from tile to tile, just like you would do in D&D. And the GM can hide certain tokens, can move the monsters, etc. So this is quite standard, and there's a lot of variation between these maps, but there are a few drawbacks to them as well. The main drawback is that you have to have these prepared. There's no way that you'll be able to whip up a map in a good minute or something unless you're really getting generic maps, or you have a whole library ready for your campaign, which some people do, but to begin doing that, it's insane, and I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. So unless you know that a certain combat is going to take place in a certain place, and the combat won't go further than that place, I wouldn't use this. Because, yeah, you'll lose a lot of time, and players don't really like that. Because when you feel as a DM that your game is running long and that you're taking your sweet time to do something, your players will already have felt it and will be bored. So that's why I recommend the following two types of maps that maybe you haven't heard of or you don't use as often because you don't know really about them. One of these is maps with zones. So the Alien RPG system uses zones, and you don't need to know about the Alien RPG system to use zones. You just have to understand the basics. A zone map is one like the one behind me, and is mostly kind of made from different blocks. So we have housing blocks, the airlock block, central command block, etc. This is for possibly like a base on a certain planet or something, but that's not really the point. You can use this for a castle, you can use this for, I don't know, a barn house. Really, any kind of combat situation would be doable with zones. But how do they function? Well, they don't have grids. Um, the garage has got squares, but that's because it's just further divided into multiple zones itself. Now, how would you go about using this? You basically have your players move from zone to zone with one movement mostly. Unless you're doing really small zones, then I would recommend kind of 2 to 3 zones. But usually you'd only do one zone. So they can move from the power to the central command with one movement. If they spend their dash, they can dash from the power to the airlock. So the power to central command to the upper airlock, not the airlock down below, just to make it clear. And most melee attacks will work on people in the same zone. If you would be able to see someone from a different zone, then you can shoot them. And that's kind of mostly it. It doesn't really work one-on-one with D&D. You'll have to do a lot of guesstimations and you'll have to be flexible to really use this. But the power that comes from a zone combat is that you can whip it up in a few seconds. I can draw a square in a few seconds. I can't draw a gridded map in a few seconds. And the power of this is that when you want your combat to take place in the garage, for example, but your players run from the garage to the place next door, you just draw the power room that's next to it or the cargo storage. And you can just easily draw a square, say that's this room, and keep on playing. It's as easy as that. You don't have to draw a whole map with grids and objects in it, and you won't lose a lot of time with this. And most things are easily convertible from grids to zones, so it doesn't take that long to really have your players convert from one system to another. It's just you have to be flexible. That's really it. So that's all about zones. Now the last one is theater of the mind. Um, the image behind me has to represent that because I couldn't really put a map here because that's just what theater of the mind is. Not all combat has to have a map and tokens and I don't know, grids, enemies, etc. Some combats are just as easily done with your mind. You can just say, as a DM, you walk through the street, there are 3 thugs or whatever approaching you from the front. What do? And if one player says, I want to attack him, you roll initiative, and you can just follow initiative and have each player attack the thugs in front of them. There is no need for a map. The only reason you'd want to further clarify certain things is when people want to interact with extra stuff around the streets, which makes it extra cool because if you had a map pre-made and there weren't crates at the side of the street, then players wouldn't be thinking of that. Now you could have a player asking you, well, is there anything else I can use on the street? For example, are there any crates that I could jump on and then jump on top of one of the thugs? What you could then say is, oh yeah, of course there is. And voila, you have just created an extra opportunity for your player to feel special, to kind of have done something special and feel like they have employed their creativity to have a better combat, which isn't really doable with any other sort of map style. And that's why I really like Theater of the Mind, because it lets you free. It lets your creativity kind of run wild. So yeah, that were